The wagon wheel caught another stone, jolting Sarah Mitchell and her son hard against the splintered boards. 5-year-old Thomas whimpered, pressing his small body closer to his mother's side. The October wind cut through their threadbare clothes like knives, carrying dust and the promise of an early winter across the endless Nebraska grasslands. Sarah's calloused hands gripped the reins tighter, her knuckles white beneath the dirt. 3 days since they'd left Millerton. 3 days since the townspeople had made it clear that a widow with debts was no longer welcome. The general store owner had been the last to turn his back, his words still echoing in her ears. Your husband's gambling debts died with him, Mrs. Mitchell. But his shame lives on. Best you find somewhere else to start fresh. Fresh. Sarah almost laughed at the bitter irony. Nothing about their flight felt fresh, only desperate and raw, like the blisters forming beneath her worn boots. The prairie stretched endlessly before them, a sea of brown grass rippling under the gray October sky. To the west, the Rocky Mountains rose like distant blue-gray sentinels, their peaks already crowned with snow. Sarah had heard stories of people disappearing into those mountains, swallowed by the wilderness. Some by choice, seeking gold or solitude, others by misfortune. She glanced at Thomas, his face pale beneath the prairie dirt. His father's death 6 months ago had aged him beyond his years. The boy rarely smiled anymore, rarely spoke. The wagon contained everything they owned: 2 blankets, a cast-iron pot, a bag of cornmeal, some dried beans, her late husband's rifle, and $20 hidden in her boot. All that remained after paying what debts she could. The sun was beginning its descent when she first noticed the dust cloud behind them. Her heart quickened. 3 riders, maybe 4, following the same trail. Could be innocent travelers. Could be something worse. "Mama?" Thomas's voice was thin with fear. "Hush now," Sarah murmured, flicking the reins to urge their tired mule faster. The animal brayed in protest, but quickened its pace slightly. The riders gained ground over the next hour. Sarah's mouth went dry as she recognized the lead rider's distinctive black hat. Jake Thornton, one of her late husband's creditors from Millerton, the kind of man who collected debts in flesh when coin wasn't available. "Well now, Mrs. Mitchell," Thornton called out as the riders surrounded the wagon, forcing her to stop. His smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Fancy meeting you out here. Thought you might have forgotten about the $300 your husband still owed me." "I paid what I could," Sarah said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "You got the house, the furniture." "Not nearly enough." Thornton's eyes traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "But perhaps we can work out another arrangement." One of his companions, a scraggly man with yellow teeth, laughed. "The boy could fetch a good price in Denver. Plenty of folks need young hands for work." Sarah's hand moved instinctively to the rifle beside her, but Thornton was faster. He grabbed the weapon, tossing it to one of his men. Now, no need for unpleasantness. We're all civilized folk here." What happened next would haunt Sarah for weeks to come. The men ransacked the wagon, taking the cornmeal, the beans, even the blankets. They found the hidden money in her boot, Thornton pocketing it with a satisfied grunt. When Thomas tried to stop them from taking his father's pocket watch, the only memento he had, one of the men backhanded him, sending the boy tumbling into the dirt. Something wild and fierce rose in Sarah then. She launched herself at the man, nails raking across his face, teeth finding his arm. The struggle was brief and brutal. When it ended, she lay gasping in the dust, her lips split, ribs aching, while Thomas sobbed beside her. "Consider us even, Mrs. Mitchell," Thornton said, mounting his horse. "Though if I were you, I'd keep heading west. Millerton's got a long memory for deadbeats and their kin." They left her there with nothing but the wagon, the exhausted mule, and the clothes on their backs. As the dust from their departure settled, Sarah pulled Thomas close, her body shaking, not from tears, but from a rage so pure it burned away her fear. "We're going to the mountains," she whispered fiercely, "where men like that won't follow." Thomas nodded against her chest. his small hands clutching her torn dress. They traveled through the night, Sarah pushing the mule beyond exhaustion. By dawn, the prairie had given way to foothills, and by the second nightfall, they were climbing into true mountain country. Pine forests closed around them, the trail becoming little more than a deer path. The temperature dropped with each mile gained in elevation. On the third day after the attack, with no food and only mountain stream water to drink, the mule finally collapsed. Sarah unhitched the dying animal, took what few possessions remained, and continued on foot with Thomas. Her city boots, never meant for such terrain, fell apart within hours. She wrapped her bleeding feet in strips torn from her petticoat and kept walking. The forest grew denser, darker. Ancient pines towered overhead, their branches blocking out all but fragments of sky. The silence was profound. No bird calls, no wind, just their labored breathing and the occasional crack of a branch underfoot. Thomas stumbled frequently now, his strength failing. Sarah carried him when she could, but her own body was approaching its limits. Hunger gnawed at her stomach like a living thing. She'd tried eating pine needles, remembering something about them being edible, but they'd only made her retch. It was near sunset on the fourth day when she smelled smoke. Not wildfire, chimney smoke. Her heart leaped with desperate hope. Following her nose, she pushed through a thick stand of aspens and found herself at the edge of a small clearing. A cabin sat there, built from rough-hewn logs, with a stone chimney releasing a steady stream of smoke. It looked solid, permanent, like it had grown from the mountain itself. A vegetable garden, now mostly harvested, occupied one side. Firewood was stacked neatly against the wall, enough to last a winter. Sarah took one step toward the cabin, then another. Her legs gave out on the third step, and she collapsed to her knees, Thomas falling beside her. The cabin door opened. The man who emerged had to duck to clear the doorframe. Sarah's first thought was that she'd wandered into a tale her grandmother used to tell, stories of giants who lived in the mountains. He stood at least 6.5 feet tall, broad-shouldered, with arms like tree trunks. A thick beard, more gray than brown, covered the lower half of his face. His clothes were a mix of deerskin and rough homespun, marked by countless mendings. But it was his eyes that held her, gray as winter storm clouds, cold and assessing. He stood perfectly still, studying them. Sarah tried to speak, to explain, to beg if necessary, but no words would come. Thomas whimpered, pressing against her. The man's gaze traveled over their torn clothes, her bloodied feet, the boy's bruised face. Something shifted in those storm-gray eyes. Not warmth, exactly, but a lessening of the cold. Without a word, he strode forward. Sarah flinched instinctively, throwing an arm protectively over Thomas. But the man simply bent down and scooped up the boy as easily as lifting a sack of flour. Thomas was too exhausted to protest. The man looked at Sarah, waiting. She understood. Using the last of her strength, she pushed herself to her feet and followed him into the cabin. The interior was sparse but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a pot of something savory bubbling over the flames. A rough-hewn table and 2 chairs occupied the center. In one corner sat a narrow bed with a bearskin cover. Tools hung neatly on the walls. Axes, traps, rifles. Everything spoke of solitary self-sufficiency. The man deposited Thomas on the bed, then moved to the fireplace. He ladled whatever was in the pot into 2 wooden bowls, handed them to Sarah along with carved spoons. The smell made her stomach clench painfully. "Slow," he said. His voice was deep, rusty with disuse. "Too fast and you'll sick it up." It was venison stew, Sarah realized, with wild onions and some kind of root vegetable. She forced herself to eat slowly, spooning small portions into Thomas's mouth when he struggled to hold the spoon. The man sat in one of the chairs, watching them eat. He didn't ask questions, not who they were, not why they'd come, not what had happened to them. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of someone who'd forgotten the need for words. When they'd finished eating, he spoke again. "Winter's coming hard this year. Early snows already hit the high passes. You try to go back down now, you'll be dead in 2 days. Maybe less, considering the shape you're in. Sarah found her voice at last. We've got nowhere to go back to. He nodded as if this explained everything. Rising, he pulled a bearskin from a wooden chest and spread it on the floor near the fireplace. You and the boy can sleep here tonight. Come morning, we'll see what's to be done. We don't. I can't pay you, Sarah said, shame burning her cheeks. Those storm-gray eyes studied her for a long moment. Didn't ask for payment. He moved toward the door, taking a rifle from the wall. Bar the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me. Where are you going? He paused at the threshold, making sure you weren't followed. Men who'd leave a woman and child in the state you're in might be fool enough to track them into my mountains. My mountains. The way he said it made Sarah believe it, that these peaks and valleys somehow belonged to him more than to God or government. After he left, Sarah barred the door as instructed. She settled Thomas on the bearskin, the boy already half asleep, then allowed herself to truly look around. Everything in the cabin was handmade but skillfully crafted. No photographs, no letters, nothing to indicate who this man was or where he'd come from. Just the tools of survival and solitude. Through the cabin's single window, she watched darkness swallow the forest. Somewhere out there, their rescuer, if that's what he was, moved through the trees like one of the shadows. Sarah pulled Thomas closer and, for the first time since leaving Millerton, allowed herself to hope that they might survive after all. She didn't know his name, didn't know if he'd let them stay beyond tonight, but she knew with bone-deep certainty that those cold gray eyes had seen their desperation and chosen not to turn away. In a world that had shown her nothing but cruelty since James's death, it was enough. For now, it was enough. Sarah woke to the sound of wood being split outside. For a moment, she couldn't place where she was. Then the events of recent days crashed back. The cabin, the mountain man who'd taken them in. She sat up quickly, finding Thomas still asleep on the bearskin, his face peaceful for the first time in months. Through the window, she could see their host working. Each swing of his axe was economical, precise. The logs split cleanly, adding to an already impressive pile. Frost covered the ground, and his breath formed clouds in the cold morning air. When she unbarred the door and stepped outside, he didn't acknowledge her presence, just continued his rhythmic work. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, shivering in her torn dress. There's a bucket by the door, he said without looking up. Creek's 50 yards north, water's cold but clean. It was the longest string of words he'd spoken yet. Sarah found the bucket and made her way to the creek, gasping as the icy water hit her face and hands. When she returned, Thomas was awake, sitting up on the bearskin with wide, wary eyes. The man had come inside, bringing an armload of wood. He built up the fire, then went to a corner she hadn't noticed before, pulling out a wooden crate. From it, he produced a pair of moccasins and what looked like a child's winter coat, patched but serviceable. These should fit the boy, he said, setting them on the table. He glanced at Sarah's destroyed boots, seemed to consider something, then added, Got nothing that'd fit you proper. Can make something, but it'll take time. Thank you, Mr. Sarah let the question hang. Elijah Stone. He didn't ask for her name in return, though she offered it anyway. Sarah Mitchell. This is Thomas. Stone nodded once, then returned to his morning routine as if they weren't there. He prepared a simple breakfast, cornmeal mush with dried berries and chunks of smoked meat. They ate in silence, Thomas shooting nervous glances at the large man. After breakfast, Stone stood by the door, pulling on a heavy coat made from what looked like buffalo hide. Got trap lines to check, be back before dark. He paused, those gray eyes finding Sarah's. Don't wander. Mountains aren't kind to those who don't know them. After he left, Sarah tried to make herself useful. She cleaned the dishes, swept the floor with a broom made of pine needles, tended the fire. Thomas helped where he could, still quiet but beginning to show interest in their surroundings. The cabin told its story in small details. Knife marks on the table from years of use, a rifle stock worn smooth from handling, Books on a high shelf, surprisingly many for such a remote place. When Sarah pulled one down, she found it was about military tactics, margins filled with penciled notes. Stone returned as shadows lengthened, carrying several rabbits and what looked like a fox pelt. He skinned the rabbits with practiced efficiency, showing Thomas how to stretch the fox pelt on a wooden frame. "You were a soldier," Sarah said. It wasn't a question. Stone's hand stilled for just a moment. "Was. My father fought in the Mexican War," she offered. "Said the mountains there reminded him of home in Virginia." "These mountains don't remind me of anywhere," Stone said. "That's why I stay." That night, after Thomas had fallen asleep, Sarah found herself sitting by the fire while Stone worked on the moccasins he'd promised. His hands, so large they dwarfed the bone needle, moved with surprising delicacy. "How long?" she asked quietly. "How long have you been up here alone?" 8 winters. That's a long time to be without anyone." He looked up from his work, firelight casting shadows across his weathered features. "Had my fill of anyone down below." Sarah wanted to ask more, but recognized the wall in his voice. She understood walls, had built plenty of her own since James died. The next days fell into a pattern. Stone would leave early to check traps or hunt. Sarah would maintain the cabin, mend clothes with supplies he provided, prepare meals from his stores. Thomas began following Stone around when he worked near the cabin, silently watching him repair tools or prepare pelts. On the 4th day, the first real snow began to fall. Sarah stood in the doorway, watching fat flakes drift down, already accumulating inches deep. In Millerton, snow meant hardship, struggling to keep warm, worrying about food. Here, with the cabin's thick walls and Stone's obvious preparation, it felt different, almost peaceful. "Going to be a bad one," Stone said, appearing beside her. She hadn't heard him approach. He moved like the mountain cats he sometimes mentioned. "See how the clouds sit heavy on the peaks? That means days of snow, maybe weeks. We should leave," Sarah said suddenly. "We've imposed enough. If we go now—" "You'll die." His voice was flat, matter of fact. "Boy wouldn't make it past the tree line. You might last a day more." He turned those storm-gray eyes on her. "That what you want?" "No, but—" "Then stop talking foolish." That night, the wind picked up, howling through the trees like a living thing. Snow piled against the cabin walls. Stone built the fire higher, and for the first time since they'd arrived, he sat with them instead of working on some task. "Tell me a story," Thomas said suddenly. It was the first time he'd spoken directly to Stone. The big man looked surprised. "Don't know any stories, boy." "Everyone knows stories," Thomas insisted with 5-year-old certainty. Stone was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Knew a man once. Cavalry scout. Could track a field mouse across bare rock. Indians called him Ghost Walker, on account of how quiet he moved." As Stone talked, his voice taking on a rhythm Sarah hadn't heard before, she realized he was talking about himself. The stories were carefully edited. No real violence, nothing to frighten a child, but she heard the truth beneath. Tales of frontier forts and indigenous warriors, of buffalo herds that stretched to the horizon, of a younger man who'd believed in duty and honor until something had broken that faith. "What happened to Ghost Walker?" Thomas asked sleepily. "He found a place where the only tracks that mattered were his own," Stone said, "and he stayed there." The boy nodded as if this made perfect sense and curled up against his mother. Soon his breathing deepened into sleep. "Thank you," Sarah whispered. Stone poked at the fire. "Boy needs to know there's more to the world than what's been done to him." It was the closest he'd come to acknowledging their situation. Sarah felt tears threaten and blinked them back. His father wasn't a bad man, just weak. The gambling, the debts. He always swore he'd stop. Men swear a lot of things. "Did you have a family? Before?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Just when Sarah thought he wouldn't answer, Stone spoke. "Had a brother, younger, followed me into the cavalry because that's what brothers do." His voice roughened. "Lakota War Party took him during a scouting mission. Took him alive. Sarah's breath caught. She knew what that meant, had heard the stories. Found what was left 3 days later. Command said it was the fortunes of war. Said we'd have our revenge in the next engagement. Stone's hands had stilled on his whittling. I buried him proper, then I walked away. Kept walking until I found these mountains. I'm sorry, he shrugged. Was a long time ago. But Sarah could see it wasn't. Not really. The pain lived in him still, driving him to this self-imposed exile. She understood that kind of pain, the kind that changed who you were at your very core. The storm raged for 3 days. During that time, the dynamics in the small cabin shifted subtly. Stone began teaching Thomas practical skills, how to bank a fire to last through the night, how to tell good wood from bad, how to read animal tracks in the snow. The boy absorbed it all with an intensity that seemed to surprise Stone. Sarah learned too. Stone showed her how to make sourdough starter from flour and wild yeast, how to preserve meat with smoke and salt, how to repair tears and hide clothing. His teaching was patient but sparse with words, demonstrating rather than explaining. On the 3rd night of the storm, Thomas had a nightmare. His terrified cries woke them all. Sarah tried to comfort him, but he was caught in the grip of terror, reliving that day on the prairie. Stone watched from across the room, his expression unreadable. Then he did something unexpected. He pulled a small wooden flute from a high shelf and began to play. The melody was haunting. Unlike anything Sarah had heard, not quite military, not quite indigenous, but something in between. Thomas's cries quieted as he listened, mesmerized. My brother made this, Stone said when he finished. Said music could calm wild horses and wilder men. It's beautiful, Sarah breathed. Stone handed the flute to Thomas. You keep it for now. Music's better than memories for keeping the dark away. The boy clutched the instrument like a treasure, and Sarah felt something crack in her chest. This hard, silent man was showing her son more kindness than he'd known from his own father. When the storm finally broke, the world outside had transformed. Snow lay 3 feet deep, turning the forest into something from a fairy tale. The temperature had plummeted too. Stone's thermometer read 10 below zero. Real winter now, he announced. No going anywhere until spring thaw. Sarah should have felt trapped, but instead, she felt an odd relief. Here in this cabin, with this strange, damaged man. She and Thomas were safer than they'd been in months, maybe years. That evening, as Stone taught Thomas to play a simple tune on the flute, Sarah made a decision. They couldn't simply take from this man all winter. She needed to contribute, to prove they were worth the shelter he provided. I can read and write, she said suddenly, and do figures. If you need help with accounts or letters or anything. Stone looked at her with those penetrating gray eyes. Can't read much myself, never had proper schooling. I could teach you if you wanted. Something flickered in his expression, vulnerability quickly hidden. Might be useful, he allowed. And so another layer added itself to their strange household. In the evenings, after Thomas was asleep, Sarah would sit with Stone at the rough table, teaching him letters by candlelight. His hands, so capable with trap and rifle, struggled with the pencil, but he persisted with the same quiet determination he brought to everything. Why now? She asked one night as he labored over writing his name. After all this time alone? He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, man needs a reason to learn new things. Didn't have one before. The weight of what he wasn't saying hung between them. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks and bent quickly over her own work, pretending not to understand. Outside, the wind sang through the pines, and snow continued to fall. Inside, the fire crackled. Thomas breathed peacefully on his bed of furs, and 2 damaged souls carefully began the process of trust. It would be a long winter, but for the first time in memory, Sarah found herself hoping it would be longer still. The peace of their mountain winters shattered on a clear morning in early December. Stone had gone out before dawn to check his furthest trap line, leaving Sarah and Thomas to their morning routines. She was teaching the boy his letters, drawing them in ash on a flat piece of bark. When she heard it, the distant whinny of horses, her blood turned to ice. No one came up this high in winter. No one except those with desperate purpose. "Thomas," she whispered, pulling him away from the window. "Remember what Mr. Stone taught you about the root cellar?" The boy nodded, his face pale but determined. Over the past weeks, Stone had shown them every hiding place around the property, just in case. He'd said, though his eyes had suggested he expected trouble eventually. Sarah lifted the concealed trap door near the back wall and helped Thomas down into the small space. "Stay quiet, no matter what you hear. Don't come out until Mr. Stone or I come for you. Mama, promise me." "I promise." She closed the trap door, scattered dirt over it, and dragged the bearskin rug into place. Her hands shook as she moved to the window. 3 riders were picking their way up the trail. No, 4. Her heart sank as she recognized Jake Thornton's black hat. How had they tracked her here? The snow should have covered any trail. But then she remembered. Thornton had boasted once about using a Pawnee tracker for his collections. Even Stone's careful woodcraft might not hide from such eyes. She barred the door, then took Stone's spare rifle from the wall. He'd taught her to load and shoot over the past weeks, insisting she needed to know. Her hands remembered the lessons, even as her mind screamed with panic. "Sarah Mitchell," Thornton's voice carried across the clearing. "We know you're in there. Saw smoke from your chimney 2 valleys over. Why don't you come out and talk civilized-like?" Sarah stayed silent, positioning herself where she could see through a gap in the shutters. The men had spread out, studying the cabin and surroundings. One pointed to Stone's workshop, another to the meat cache. "Nice setup you found here." Thornton continued. "Must be cozy, sharing quarters with whoever built this place. Though I wonder what a decent woman's doing shacking up with a mountain hermit. Course, maybe you ain't so decent anymore." Rage flared through Sarah's fear. She forced it down, trying to think. Stone wouldn't be back for hours. She had to protect Thomas, had to buy time. "What do you want?" she called out. "There she is." Thornton sounded pleased. "What I want is simple. Mrs. Mitchell, your husband owed me $300. You paid, let's call it 50. That leaves 250. Now, I'm a reasonable man. The boy would fetch maybe 100 in Denver. You," he paused, and she could hear the leer in his voice. "Well, a pretty widow could work off the rest in a year or 2 at the right establishment." Sarah's finger found the trigger. "I'll die before I let you take us." "Now that'd be a shame. Boyd still fetch his price, orphan or not. Maybe more. Orphans are easier to manage." One of the men had dismounted. Approaching the cabin's side window, Sarah swung the rifle that direction, and he quickly backed away. "Where's your mountain man?" Thornton asked. "Tracks show he left early. Big man, from the boot prints. But 1 man against 4? He laughed. "Even if he's handy with that rifle he's carrying, we'll put him down like a rabid dog." The thought of Stone walking into an ambush made Sarah's chest tight. These men had no idea what they were threatening, not just her and Thomas, but the fragile peace Stone had built in these mountains, the sanctuary that had begun healing all their wounds. "Tell you what," Thornton said, "you come out now. We'll leave peaceful. No harm to your friend's property, but you make us come in." The threat hung in the cold air. Sarah was forming a desperate plan when she caught movement in the tree line. Her heart leaped, but it wasn't Stone. A 5th rider emerged, this one wearing a deputy's badge. "Thornton," the deputy called. "This isn't what we agreed. You said the woman stole from you, but this looks more like hunting than recovering stolen goods." "Stay out of this, Morrison." Thornton snapped. "You're here to make it legal, nothing more." Deputy Morrison dismounted, his hand resting on his sidearm. He was younger than the others, with an honest face that looked troubled. "Legal means by the law, not whatever this is. The law says a man can collect his debts. The law also says a lot about threatening women and children." Morrison moved closer to the cabin. "Mrs. Mitchell? I'm Deputy Morrison from Cedar Ridge. Would you tell me your side of this? Sarah almost sobbed with relief. An honest lawman. Maybe there was hope. My husband owed Mr. Thornton money when he died. I paid what I could, gave him our house, our furniture, everything. But he wants my son, wants to sell him. That's a lie, Thornton snarled. Is it? Morrison turned on him. Because what I'm hearing sounds like slave trading, which last I checked was illegal in the Colorado Territory. The tension crackled between the men. Sarah saw Thornton's hand drift toward his gun, saw his men shifting nervously, violence balanced on a knife's edge. Then Stone stepped out of the forest. He moved like smoke, rifle cradled casual but ready. Sarah hadn't heard him approach, neither had the others. Judging by their startled faces, he positioned himself between the cabin and the riders, those storm-gray eyes taking in everything. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "you're on my land. Thornton recovered first, and you're harboring fugitives. Mountain man, this woman owes me. The woman and boy are my guests." Stone's voice carried no threat, but something in it made the horses shift nervously. "In these mountains, that means something. Now, see here," one of Thornton's men started. Stone's rifle swung toward him, not quite pointing, but making the possibility clear. "Wasn't talking to you." Deputy Morrison stepped forward. "Sir, I'm trying to sort this out peacefully. These men claim—" "I heard what they claim." Stone's eyes never left Thornton. "Also heard the lady's answer. Seems clear enough." Thornton's face flushed red. "You don't know who you're crossing. Hermit, I've got friends. Influence. In town. Maybe." Stone shifted slightly, and suddenly he seemed larger, more dangerous. "This isn't town." The truth of it hung in the air. They were miles from civilization, in Stone's territory, even with numbers. The riders looked suddenly uncertain. Morrison cleared his throat. "Mr. Thornton, I think we should go. Whatever claim you have, this isn't the way—" "Shut up!" Thornton's composure cracked. "I didn't ride all this way to leave empty-handed. That boy's worth good money. And the woman—" Stone moved. Sarah barely saw it. One moment, he was still. The next, his rifle butt connected with Thornton's jaw. The man tumbled from his saddle, landing hard in the snow. The other riders went for their guns. But Stone's rifle was already aimed. "Don't!" That single word froze them all. Sarah had never heard such deadly certainty in a voice. Morrison had his pistol out but pointed at the ground. "Everyone calm down, Mr. Stone, was it? I can't let you assault. Man threatened a woman and child under my protection." Stone's voice was flat, emotionless. "Where I come from, that's cause enough." Thornton groaned, struggling to sit up, blood streaming from his mouth. "You'll hang for this," he slurred. "Maybe." Stone glanced at Morrison. "You seem like a decent sort, deputy. So I'll tell you plain, these folks stay here. Anyone comes for them. I'll consider it an attack on my home, and I'll respond accordingly." "You can't threaten the law," one of Thornton's men blustered. Stone's gray eyes found his. "I've lived up here 8 winters. Seen 20 men at least come looking for gold. Fugitives. Whatever. Know how many went back down?" The silence stretched until Morrison asked quietly, "How many?" "Everyone I didn't have cause to stop." The implication hung heavy as snow clouds. Morrison holstered his weapon slowly. "Mrs. Mitchell, is it your wish to remain here?" "Yes," Sarah called from the cabin, voice steady despite her shaking hands. "My son and I are here by choice." The deputy nodded. "Then I see no crime." He looked at Thornton's men. "Help him onto his horse. We're leaving." "This isn't over." Thornton snarled as his men hauled him up. "I'll be back with more men, with a real lawman." "No," Stone said quietly. "You won't." Something in those 3 words made Thornton pale beneath the blood. Stone stepped closer to the mounted man, speaking low enough that Sarah could barely hear. "I know you're kind. Prey on the weak. Take what you want, but these mountains have swallowed harder men than you. You come back. You bring trouble to this woman or boy, and I'll show you what I learned from the Lakota about making a man regret his choices. And that badge-wearing boy won't be able to stop me." Thornton's eyes went wide. He kicked his horse, fleeing down the trail. His men followed quickly. Only Morrison lingered. "Ma'am," he called. "If you need help, real help, Cedar Ridge isn't that far." "Thank you," Sarah managed. The deputy looked at Stone. "I'll do what I can to keep Thornton away. But he's got money, connections. Be careful." Stone just nodded. They watched the riders disappear into the trees, waited another 10 minutes to be sure. Only then did Stone lower his rifle. Sarah burst from the cabin, running to him. "Thomas is hidden. I need to... Are they really gone?" "For now." His eyes scanned the tree line. "Get the boy. We need to talk." She retrieved Thomas from the root cellar, the child pale but unharmed. They sat by the fire while Stone barred the door and checked his weapons. "They'll be back," Sarah said dully. "Maybe not Thornton himself, but he'll send others. I've brought danger to your home." Stone sat across from them, his expression unreadable. "Maybe. We should go. I can't ask you to. You didn't ask." He looked at Thomas, who was clutching his mother's hand. "Boy, you were brave today. Stayed hidden like I taught you." Thomas nodded solemnly. "Good." Stone turned to Sarah. "Those men come back. It won't be for weeks. Snow's getting deeper. Passes are closing. Spring at the earliest. And then..." He was quiet for a moment. "Depends on how much they want you. How much Thornton's willing to spend for his revenge." Sarah felt tears threaten. After finding safety, peace, the thought of running again was almost unbearable. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for bringing this to you." Stone did something unexpected then. He reached across the table, his calloused hand covering hers briefly. The touch was light, there and gone, but it sent warmth flooding through her. "Been 8 years since I had anything worth protecting besides my own hide," he said quietly. "Man forgets what that feels like. Maybe it's time I remembered. You don't owe us..." "Not about owing." He stood abruptly, moving to the window. "About choosing, I chose to let you stay. Now I'm choosing to keep you safe. Don't insult me by suggesting I don't know my own mind." That night, Stone changed their routines. He showed Sarah where he kept extra ammunition, taught her the warning whistles he used, explained which trails to watch. He started working before dawn to reinforce the cabin's defenses, adding thick shutters, digging hidden caches for supplies, setting trap lines that had nothing to do with catching game. "You're preparing for war," Sarah said one evening, watching him oil his rifles. "Preparing for possibilities." He glanced at Thomas, who was practicing on the wooden flute. "Boy needs to learn too. How to move quiet, where to run if running's needed. He's 5 years old. Old enough to survive, if he's taught right." The hardness in his voice reminded her that this man had seen terrible things, done terrible things. But when Thomas came to show him a new tune he'd learned, Stone's eyes softened. He was learning to be gentle again, just as they were learning to be strong. That night by the fire, with the wind howling outside and danger lurking in the future, Sarah made her own choice. When Thomas was asleep, she moved to sit beside Stone on the bench where he was carving. "Elijah," she said softly. It was the first time she'd used his given name. He stilled, looking at her. "Whatever comes, I want you to know, we're grateful. I'm grateful, not just for the shelter, but for showing us we don't have to be afraid all the time." His gray eyes held hers, and something passed between them, understanding, perhaps, or recognition of kindred spirits. "Sarah," he said, her name rough on his tongue, "I need you to promise something." "What?" "If things go bad, if I tell you to run, you take the boy and go. No looking back, no hesitating. You run, and you don't stop." "I can't..." "Promise." She saw the weight of his brother's death in his eyes, the fear of failing to protect again. "I promise," she whispered. He nodded, returning to his carving, but his shoulder remained pressed against hers, a warm, solid presence in the uncertain night. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the tracks of violent men, granting them time Time to prepare. Time to grow stronger. Time for whatever was growing between them to take deeper root. The weeks after Thornton's visit passed in heightened vigilance. Stone had transformed their mountain sanctuary into something resembling a frontier fort. Tripwires made from fishing line crisscrossed the approaches. Bells crafted from tin cans hung in the trees, ready to announce unwelcome visitors. He'd even dug fighting positions at key points around the clearing, camouflaged with pine boughs and snow. January brought the deepest cold Sarah had ever known. The thermometer dropped to 20 below, then 30. Ice formed inside the cabin windows despite the constant fire. On such nights, they all slept close to the hearth, Thomas between them, sharing warmth and wool blankets. It was during one of these bitter nights that they heard the wolves. The howling started distant, echoing off the mountain peaks, but over the course of an hour, it drew closer, circling the cabin. Thomas pressed against Sarah, eyes wide with ancient fear. "Pack's hunting," Stone said calmly, adding another log to the fire. "Deer are scarce this winter. Wolves are getting bold. Will they attack?" Sarah tried to match his calm tone for Thomas's sake. "Not the cabin. Too much human scent." He moved to the window, peering out. "But they might go for the meat cache if they're desperate enough." As if in answer, a chorus of howls erupted just beyond the clearing. Sarah could see shapes moving between the trees, glimpses of gray fur and yellow eyes reflecting the moonlight. "I want to see," Thomas whispered. Stone considered, then lifted the boy to the window. "Look there, by the big pine. See him?" A massive wolf stood at the edge of the forest, clearly the pack leader, even from inside. Sarah could sense its power, its wildness. "He's beautiful," Thomas breathed. "Beautiful and dangerous." Stone agreed. "Like most things in these mountains, respect them, don't fear them, and you'll do fine." The wolves lingered for another hour before melting back into the forest. But the encounter had awakened something in Thomas. He began asking endless questions about the animals, the mountains, the ways of survival. Stone answered patiently, seeming to enjoy having an eager student. It was 3 nights later when real danger returned. Sarah woke to Stone's hand on her shoulder, his finger pressed to his lips. She nodded, instantly alert. He gestured to the window. A faint orange glow flickered through the trees. Campfire. Someone was camped less than a mile from the cabin. Stone was already dressed, buckling on his pistol belt. He handed Sarah the loaded rifle, then knelt by Thomas, waking him gently. "Remember what I taught you?" he whispered to the boy. Thomas nodded, brave despite his fear. "Good. You stay with your mother. If you hear shooting, you both go to the special place. Wait for my signal to come back." The special place was a cave Stone had prepared a 1/4 mile up the mountain, stocked with supplies and hidden by a fall of rock. They'd practiced the route until both Sarah and Thomas could find it in the dark. Stone squeezed Sarah's shoulder once, then slipped out into the night. She barred the door behind him, then took up position by the window. Thomas huddled beside her. The waiting was agony. Every sound made her heart race. Was that a footstep or just snow falling from a branch? The orange glow remained steady, taunting in its mystery. Who would camp so close? Trappers would know better than to encroach on another man's territory, which meant a shadow moved across the snow. Then another. Sarah's grip tightened on the rifle, but the shadows resolved into familiar shapes. Stone returning, and with him, 2 figures. As they entered the ring of light from the cabin window, Sarah gasped. One was Deputy Morrison. The other was an Indian woman, badly injured and barely conscious. Stone carried the woman inside while Morrison followed, his face grim. "Found them on my way up," Stone explained tersely. "Morrison was bringing her to me. She escaped from Thornton's place," the deputy said as Stone laid the woman on the bed. "She's Arapaho. Thornton's been keeping her as a servant." The pause before the last word spoke volumes. The woman was young, perhaps 20, with a bruised face and what looked like whip marks on her back. Sarah immediately went to work, heating water and gathering what medical supplies Stone had. "Her name's Mary Crowfeather," Morrison continued. "Speaks some English. She told me Thornton's gathering men, planning something big come spring. I tried to get her to Cedar Ridge, but she insisted on warning the mountain man who protects the widow." "How did she know?" Sarah began. "Thornton's been drinking and talking about what he's going to do to you, to your boy, to Stone here." Morrison looked sick. "I came to warn you and found her trying to climb the mountain alone, half frozen." Mary's eyes fluttered open. "Finding Stone. You are Ghost Walker," she whispered in accented English. "My uncle spoke of you, said you walked with honor among the people." Stone's face went very still. "That was a long time ago. Time does not change honor." She gripped his arm weakly. "The evil man, Thornton, he plans to bring 20 men, his cousin from Denver, miners, killers. They come when snow melts." Her eyes moved to Sarah. "He says terrible things about what they will do." Sarah's blood ran cold, but she kept her hands steady as she cleaned the woman's wounds. 20 men. Even Stone couldn't fight those odds. "You have to leave," Morrison said urgently. "All of you. I'll help however I can, but—" "No." Stone's voice was granite. "This is my land, my home. 1 man against 20? That's not courage. It's suicide." Stone looked at the injured woman, at Thomas watching wide-eyed from his corner, at Sarah with her hands bloody from tending wounds inflicted by evil men. Maybe, but running means they win. Means men like Thornton keep doing what they do. "So you'll die for pride?" Morrison demanded. "No." Stone's gray eyes found Sarah's. "For something better." They made Mary comfortable, and Morrison agreed to stay until morning. The deputy was clearly torn between duty and decency, the badge on his chest at war with the man underneath. Late that night, with Mary sleeping and Morrison dozing by the fire, Sarah found Stone standing watch outside. The stars were brilliant in the clear mountain air. The Milky Way. A river of light across the sky. "You're thinking of sending us away," she said. It wasn't a question. "Be safer for you. Morrison could take you east, maybe to California." "No." He turned, surprised by her firmness. "You don't run from men like Thornton," Sarah said. "I tried that. It doesn't work. They follow, they take, they destroy. The only way to stop them is to stand. 20 men, Sarah, maybe more. Then we'd better be ready." She moved closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. "I'm tired of being afraid, Elijah. Tired of teaching my son to hide. If we die here, at least we die fighting for something." He studied her face in the starlight. "You've changed. You changed me. You and these mountains." She laughed softly, bitterly. 3 months ago, I was a town woman who'd never held a rifle. Now I can shoot, trap, survive a blizzard. I'm not the same woman who collapsed at your door." "No," he agreed quietly. "You're not." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then Stone did something unexpected. He pulled her against him, wrapping his buffalo coat around them both. Sarah stiffened for an instant, then relaxed into his warmth. "I failed my brother," he said into her hair. "I won't fail you. You haven't failed anyone. You've saved us, given us hope." "Hope," he laughed, short and harsh. "I'd forgotten what that felt like. Then you showed up with those green eyes full of fear and fire, and that boy looking at me like I could fix the world." Sarah pulled back enough to see his face. "Elijah." But whatever she might have said was lost as Mary cried out from inside. They rushed in to find her fever-bright and rambling in her native tongue. Sarah spent the rest of the night nursing her while Stone and Morrison took turns standing watch. By morning, Mary's fever had broken. She was weak but lucid, able to tell them more about Thornton's plans. The man had become obsessed, his pride wounded by the public humiliation. He'd spent the winter recruiting the worst men money could buy. But why wait for spring? Morrison wondered. If he's that set on revenge? Because he's smart, Stone said grimly. Knows these mountains in winter would kill half his men before they reached us. He'll wait for the thaw, when they can move fast and in force. So, we have time, Sarah said. Time to prepare. Morrison shook his head. Prepare how? You can't fight 20 men, even with the best ground and all the preparation in the world. My uncle could, Mary said weakly. With 5 warriors, he held a canyon against 40 soldiers for 3 days. What happened? Thomas asked. Speaking for the first time, Mary smiled sadly. He died, but the women and children escaped. Sometimes that is victory enough. The words settled over them like snow. Sarah saw the calculation in Stone's eyes, not whether he could win, but how many he could take with him, how much time he could buy. No, she said firmly. We're not planning for noble defeats. We're planning to survive. Sarah, Stone began. Will you guard us forever? The question burst from her, desperate and raw. That's what I need to know. Elijah Stone, not for a last stand, not for some mountain man's blaze of glory, but forever. Will you guard us forever? The cabin went silent. Even the fire seemed to pause in its crackling. Stone stared at her, something shifting in those storm-gray eyes. Yes, he said simply. Forever. Morrison cleared his throat. Well then, seems we'd better figure out how to make forever possible. Mary struggled to sit up. The people, my mother's clan, they winter 2 valleys north. My uncle, the one who knew Ghostwalker, he leads them now. He would help, if asked right. Indians and whites fighting together? Morrison sounded skeptical. That'll go over well with the authorities. To hell with the authorities, Stone said flatly. They want to bring war to my mountain. They'll get war, but on my terms. He looked around the cabin, at Sarah, fierce with determination, at Thomas Young but already showing the steel his mother had found, at Mary, broken but not defeated, at Morrison, torn between law and justice. We have until spring thaw, Stone said. Maybe 6 weeks, maybe 8. Time enough to turn this mountain into a fortress. Time enough to gather allies. His eyes found Sarah's again. Time enough to make sure forever means something. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, not of fear, but of something fiercer. Hope. Maybe. Or just recognition that sometimes you find your stand in the most unexpected places, with the most unexpected people. Then we'd better get started, she said. Outside. Dawn was breaking over the peaks, painting the snow pink and gold. It was beautiful and harsh and eternal, like the mountains themselves, like the love growing between 2 damaged souls who'd found each other in the wilderness. Spring would bring violence, blood, a reckoning. But for now, in this moment, they had each other. They had purpose. They had a chance. It would have to be enough. The attack came with the spring thaw, just as the aspen buds were beginning to show green. Stone had been right about the timing. Thornton waited until the passes were clear, but the ground was still soft with snowmelt, thinking it would slow any escape. He hadn't counted on Stone turning the terrain to their advantage. Sarah woke to the tin can bells ringing in the pre-dawn darkness. 3 short rings, then 2 long, the signal for multiple intruders from the east. She was out of bed instantly, Thomas already moving to his assigned position by the back window with the small rifle Stone had cut down for him to handle. Remember what we practiced, she told him, checking her own weapons. The boy nodded, his face pale but determined. Stone appeared from his watch position, Morrison right behind him. Over the past weeks, the deputy had chosen his side, officially taking leave from his position to help prepare their defense. Mary Crow Feather, recovered from her injuries, had proven invaluable. Her uncle had indeed remembered Ghostwalker with respect, and 5 Arapaho warriors had come to even old debts. How many? Sarah asked. 18, maybe 20, Stone reported. Coming up the main trail, just like we figured. Fools. Black Elk, Mary's uncle, materialized from the shadows. The old warrior's English was limited but effective. They walk into the death ground. Stone had spent weeks preparing that trail. Deadfalls, pits, tripwires attached to black powder charges Morrison had lost from the Cedar Ridge supply. The approach to the cabin had become a maze of traps. "Sarah, take Thomas to the cave," Stone ordered. "No." She'd argued this point before and won. "We agreed. I fight from here until you signal retreat." His jaw tightened, but he nodded. They'd learned to trust each other's judgment over the long winter months. The first explosion echoed across the valley as the lead riders hit the tripwire. Screams followed. Then confused shouting. Stone had predicted they'd send scouts ahead, and he'd been right. The main force would be more careful now, but also more frightened. "That's 3 down," Morrison muttered, watching through the rifle slot they'd cut in the wall. The attackers regrouped, trying to flank through the forest. More explosions, these from the Arapaho positions. Black Elk and his warriors knew these mountains like Stone did, and they'd spent days setting ambush points. By full daylight, Thornton's force had been reduced by 1/3, and they hadn't even reached the cabin clearing. Sarah could see them through her rifle scope, taking cover behind trees, afraid to advance. She spotted Thornton himself, his black hat unmistakable, gesturing angrily at his men. "He's going to try talking," Stone predicted. "When the shooting stops, when he calls out promises, that's when they'll rush us." Sure enough, Thornton's voice soon rang out. "Stone, Mrs. Mitchell! This doesn't have to end in more bloodshed. Send out the woman and boy, and we'll leave peaceful like you left Mary Crow Feather," Sarah shouted back, "surprising everyone, including herself. Like you leave any woman who can't defend herself? That's different. She's just a—" Mary's rifle cracked, and Thornton's hat flew off his head. The shot had been deliberately high, but the message was clear. "Savage bitch!" Thornton snarled, his civilized mask finally slipping completely. That's when they rushed. It was chaos, gunfire from all directions, men screaming, the acrid smell of black powder. Sarah worked her rifle mechanically, picking targets, firing, reloading. Beside her, Thomas loaded spare rifles with shaking but efficient hands. Stone was everywhere at once, appearing at different windows, making it seem like they had more defenders than they did. The first wave broke against the cabin like water on stone. Bodies littered the clearing, some still, others crawling for cover. But Thornton had brought hard men, killers who'd survived worse. They regrouped, found better positions, settled in for a siege. "Phase 2, Stone said grimly. This was the dangerous part, leaving the fortified cabin to take the fight to the enemy. But staying put meant being slowly picked off or burned out. Stone, Morrison, and 2 of the Arapaho warriors slipped out the back while Sarah and Mary kept up covering fire. Thomas watched the rear approach, his young eyes sharp for any flanking movement. The battle in the forest was brutal and quick. Sarah could track it by sound, the crack of rifles, the meaty impact of hand-to-hand combat, men crying out in pain or fury. Her heart hammered each time she heard gunfire, not knowing if Stone was shooting or being shot at. Then she saw him emerge from the tree line behind 3 of Thornton's men. They never knew he was there. 3 quick shots, 3 men down. Stone moved like his nickname, Ghost Walker, there and gone before the enemy could react. By noon, Thornton's force was shattered. The survivors clustered around their leader, backs to a rock face, surrounded but still dangerous. Sarah counted 7 men left, including Thornton himself. "Give it up," Morrison called out. "You're finished. I'll see you all hang." Thornton screamed back. "Every last one of you. Indians and women fighting, it ain't legal, ain't civilized." "Neither is what you do to women," Stone replied, stepping into the open. It was a calculated risk. Sarah's heart stopped as Thornton raised his pistol, but Stone was already moving. The shot went wide, and Stone's return fire didn't miss. Thornton spun and fell, clutching his shoulder. That broke the remainder. Some threw down their weapons, others ran, only to be caught by Black Elk's warriors. In minutes, it was over. Sarah emerged from the cabin on shaking legs, Thomas clinging to her hand. The clearing looked like a battlefield, which it was. Bodies, blood, the smell of gunpowder and death. She pulled Thomas close, trying to shield him. But the boy had seen too much already to be protected from this. Stone stood over Thornton, who lay groaning in the mud. The man who'd terrorized them for so long looked pathetic now, his fine clothes ruined, his power broken. "Kill me then," Thornton gasped. "Finish it." "No," Stone said quietly. "Death's too easy. Morrison's going to take you back to Cedar Ridge, and you're going to confess everything. What you did to Mary, what you tried to do here. All of it. They'll never believe—" "They'll believe Mary," Morrison interrupted, "producing a set of shackles, and the other women who come forward once they know you can't hurt them anymore." As Morrison secured the prisoners who'd surrendered, Stone turned to Sarah. His face was splattered with other men's blood, his eyes holding that 1,000-yard stare she'd seen in soldiers before. Without thinking, she went to him, reaching up to touch his face. "It's over," she whispered. "Is it?" He looked around at the carnage. "This is what I brought to your life. Death, violence. No." She gripped his face firmly, forcing him to meet her eyes. "You brought us life, freedom, a chance to stop being afraid." "Sarah," but she silenced him with a kiss. It was their first, there in that blood-soaked clearing with the spring sun warming their faces. It tasted of gunpowder and desperation and hope when they broke apart. Thomas was tugging at Stone's coat. The big man knelt, coming to the boy's eye level. "Did we win?" Thomas asked in a small voice. "We survived," Stone said carefully. "Sometimes that's the same thing." "Will they come back? More bad men?" Stone looked at Sarah, then back at the boy. "Maybe, but we'll be ready, and we'll protect each other. Always." Thomas nodded solemnly, then surprised everyone by throwing his arms around Stone's neck. The mountain man froze for a moment, then slowly, carefully, returned the embrace. Mary Crowfeather approached, supported by her uncle. "The debt is paid. Ghost Walker," Black Elk said formally. "But I think we remain friends. Yes?" "Yes," Stone agreed, standing. "Friends." As the Arapaho warriors began the grim work of dealing with the dead, Morrison prepared to take the prisoners down the mountain. He pulled Stone aside. "This won't be the end of it," he warned. "Thornton has family, connections. There'll be an investigation. Let them come," Stone said. "We fought in self-defense. You witnessed it. I did." Morrison looked around the fortified clearing. "But Stone, you can't live like this forever, on guard, waiting for the next attack." "Watch me," Morrison sighed. "What I'm saying is, maybe it's time to stop living like a hermit. Come down to town sometimes. Let people see you're not some wild mountain monster. Build connections, community. It's harder to attack a man who's part of something bigger." Stone considered this. Maybe. As Morrison led the prisoners away and the Arapaho departed with promises of continued friendship, the three survivors of the battle stood together in their clearing. The cabin bore scars, bullet holes, scorch marks from a failed attempt to burn them out, but it stood strong. "We need to clean up," Sarah said practically, "and repair the damage, and—" Stone caught her hand. "Later, right now. We're alive. That's enough for this moment." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, they sat together on the cabin steps. Thomas played a halting tune on his flute, the notes sweet against the memory of gunfire. Sarah leaned against Stone's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him. "You asked if I'd guard you forever," Stone said quietly. "You said yes. I meant it. But Sarah—" He turned to face her fully. "I'm not an easy man. This life, these mountains, it's hard, lonely, dangerous. I know." She smiled, reaching up to trace a scar on his cheek. "But it's our life now. Our mountains, our home. Our home," he repeated, wonder in his voice. That night, as they worked together to erase the signs of battle, Stone told her something he'd never shared before, the full story of his brother's death, of the rage that had driven him into exile, of the long years learning to live with only guilt and ghosts for company. Then you came, he said. You and Thomas, needing protection, yes, but giving something back, making this place alive again. We all saved each other, Sarah said firmly. That's what family does. Family. The word hung between them, precious and fragile as spring ice. But as Thomas came to show them a rabbit he'd spotted near the garden, as Mary stopped by to check on them before returning to her people, as the stars came out over their battle-scarred but unbroken home, the word grew stronger. They'd fought for this ground, bled for it, killed for it. But more than that, they'd chosen it, chosen each other. In the wild heart of the Colorado mountains, 3 broken people had built something worth defending. And defend it they would, forever, if necessary. But for tonight, with the danger past and the future uncertain but theirs to shape, they simply held each other close and watched the stars wheel overhead. Grateful for this moment of peace carved from violence, this love born from desperation, this family forged in the crucible of survival. The mountains stood eternal around them, and in their shadow, the unlikely trio began the work of turning a battlefield back into a home. The winter following the battle was the hardest yet, not from external threats. Word of Thornton's defeat had spread, and even the roughest men thought twice about challenging the mountain stronghold. The difficulty came from within, from 3 souls learning to truly live together after months of simply surviving. The first blizzard struck in early November, fiercer than any Sarah had experienced. For 5 days, snow fell without pause, burying the world in white silence. The temperature plummeted until even breathing hurt, ice crystals forming in their lungs with each inhalation. On the 3rd day, they ran low on firewood. The stockpile outside was buried under 8 feet of snow, impossible to reach. Stone had to tunnel out through the drift blocking the door, working for hours in the killing cold while Sarah kept the dying fire alive with furniture they could spare. A stool here, a shelf there. We should have prepared better, Stone said that night, his hands wrapped around a cup of pine needle tea. Frostbite had touched his fingers, leaving them stiff and painful. We prepared for war, Sarah replied, tending to his hands with bear grease. We forgot to prepare for living. Thomas lay between them, burning with fever. The boy had been weakening for days, the harsh conditions finally overwhelming his small body. They'd used the last of their medicine, melted snow for water, kept him as warm as possible, but the fever wouldn't break. He needs a doctor, Sarah whispered, fear making her voice tight. Can't reach one, not in this. Stone stared at the frost-covered window, jaw clenched against his own helplessness. All his skills, all his knowledge of survival, and he couldn't save one small boy from illness. On the 4th night, with the wind howling like all the demons of hell, Thomas's breathing grew labored. Sarah held him, singing lullabies her mother had taught her, while Stone paced the small cabin like a caged animal. There's an old Arapaho remedy, he said suddenly. Bark from a specific willow, grows by the hot springs 2 valleys over. Black Elk mentioned it once. That's miles away. In this storm, I'll make it. Elijah, no, you'll die out there. He knelt beside them, touching Thomas's burning forehead with surprising gentleness. Maybe, but doing nothing. That'll kill me surer than any storm. Before she could stop him, he was gearing up. Layers of fur, snowshoes, his rifle. Sarah caught his arm at the door. If you die out there, we die in here, she said fiercely. You understand? Without you, Thomas and I won't last the winter. So you come back, Elijah Stone. You come back to us. He pulled her close, kissing her hard. Guard our boy. I'll bring the medicine. Then he was gone, swallowed by the white fury outside. The next 20 hours were the longest of Sarah's life. She kept Thomas alive through sheer will, dripping water between his cracked lips, holding him when convulsions shook his small frame. The fire burned lower, the wood nearly gone. But she didn't dare leave Thomas to dig for more. She talked to keep them both anchored to life, told Thomas stories of his father, the good memories, few as they were, told him about Stone, how the mountain man was out there fighting through the storm for medicine. Told him about the future they'd build together when spring came. A bigger garden, maybe some chickens, books to read and songs to learn. "Don't leave me," she whispered into his sweat-soaked hair. "Please, baby, don't leave me." Dawn of the 5th day brought eerie silence. The storm had passed, leaving a world transformed. Sarah peered through the window at mountains of snow, trees bent and broken under the weight. No sign of Stone. Thomas's breathing was barely audible now. His skin had taken on a gray pallor that terrified her. She'd seen that color before, on James's face as he died, the color of giving up. Then movement in the snow, a figure struggling up the slope, more ice than man, dragging himself forward through sheer determination. Sarah flew to the door, fighting through the drift. Stone collapsed just as she reached him, his face blue with cold, ice crystals in his beard. His pack, frozen to his back, contained strips of willow bark. She dragged him inside, working frantically. The bark went into hot water for Thomas while she stripped Stone's frozen clothes, wrapped him in every blanket they had. His body was like ice, barely shivering, a bad sign. She'd heard freezing men stopped shivering near the end. "Don't you dare!" she hissed, rubbing his limbs to restore circulation. "You promised forever. Forever isn't done yet." Somehow, she managed both of them. Spooned the willow tea into Thomas, forced hot liquid down Stone's throat. The cabin became a battlefield where she fought death itself, refusing to yield either of her men to its cold embrace. By nightfall, Thomas's fever broke. His eyes opened, focused and aware, finding her face. "Mama," Sarah sobbed, pulling him close. "I'm here, baby, I'm here." "Where's Mr. Stone?" She looked over at the man who'd nearly died saving her son. He was conscious now, wrapped in blankets by the rebuilt fire. Their eyes met across the small space, holding volumes of unspoken words. "He's here too," she whispered. "We're all here, together." Recovery was slow for all of them. The willow bark had saved Thomas, but weeks passed before he regained full strength. Stone's frostbite cost him 2 toes and left his hands painful for months. Sarah, exhausted from her vigil, succumbed to her own fever and spent days drifting in and out of consciousness. But they survived. More than that, the crisis had burned away the last walls between them. There were no more careful distances, no more pretense that this was temporary. They were a unit now, forged by necessity into something stronger than any of them alone. When Stone was well enough to work again, he set about solving the problems winter had exposed. He dug a covered passage to the woodshed, reinforced the cabin's insulation, built a second fireplace. Sarah preserved more food, gathered more medicine, learned everything Stone could teach about reading weather signs. Thomas, once recovered, threw himself into learning with new intensity. The brush with death had changed him, made him older than his years. He helped with every task, absorbed every lesson, as if preparing for a future where he might need to be the protector. One night in January, as they sat by the fire with bellies full and warmth in abundance, Thomas asked a question that had clearly been weighing on him. "Are you my father now?" Stone's hand stilled on the trap he was mending. Sarah held her breath. "Your father was James Mitchell," Stone said carefully. "He gave you life, gave you his name. That won't change." Thomas nodded slowly. "But he's gone, and you're here. You saved me, taught me things. Isn't that what fathers do?" "I suppose it is." "Then can I call you Pa, not to forget my real father, but because I need one who's here?" Stone looked at Sarah, something vulnerable in his eyes. She nodded, tears threatening. "If you want," Stone said roughly. "I'd be honored." Thomas smiled, a real smile, the first in so long. "Pa, I like how it sounds." That night, after Thomas slept, Stone and Sarah sat close on the narrow bed, not speaking, just being. The wind howled outside, but the cabin was warm, secure. They'd survived the worst nature could throw at them. "He shouldn't have to ask," Stone said finally. "About calling me Pa. Should be official, legal." Sarah's heart skipped. "What are you saying?" He turned to face her fully. "I'm saying a boy needs a proper family, papers that say so, a mother and father, married legal." He paused, struggling with words. "I'm saying I want to be your husband, Sarah Mitchell, if you'll have me." It wasn't romantic. No flowers, no bended knee. Just a scarred mountain man offering his heart with the same practical directness he brought to survival. But Sarah had learned that love in these mountains wasn't about pretty words. It was about who stood beside you when the storms came. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll have you. Elijah Stone. Forever. Remember?" He kissed her then, gentle despite his strength, and she tasted promise in it. Spring would come, and with it a trip to Cedar Ridge for a proper wedding. But in her heart, the ceremony had already happened, sealed in blood during the battle, consecrated by sacrifice during the storm, blessed by a small boy's trust. Outside, February wind rattled the windows, and snow began to fall again. But inside the cabin, 3 people who'd found each other against all odds held close. A family not by blood, but by choice, by trial, by love tested in the crucible of survival. The mountains had demanded everything from them: comfort, safety, innocence. But in return, they'd given something precious: a home that couldn't be taken, bonds that couldn't be broken, love that feared nothing because it had already faced the worst and emerged stronger. Spring was still months away. More storms would come, more challenges, more long nights when death prowled close. But they would meet them together, this unlikely family, and they would endure, in the wild heart of the Colorado Rockies, where winter showed no mercy and weak things died. Love had proven itself the strongest force of all. Spring arrived late that year, but when it came, it brought more than melting snow. On a bright April morning, riders appeared on the trail, not the hostile approach of the previous year, but an official procession. Deputy Morrison led the group, accompanied by a judge, a territorial marshal, and several townspeople from Cedar Ridge. Stone stood ready with his rifle, old habits dying hard. But Morrison raised his hands peacefully. "Official business. Stone, Judge Harrington needs to take statements about last year's incident." The investigation took 3 days. Judge Harrington, a stern man with piercing blue eyes, interviewed everyone separately. Sarah told her story clearly. The debts, the threats, Thornton's pursuit. Stone spoke simply of defending his home. Even Thomas, brave despite his nervousness, told what he'd witnessed. What surprised them were the other witnesses. Morrison had brought 2 women from Cedar Ridge, former servants who'd suffered under Thornton's cruelty. Their testimonies painted a picture of a man who'd terrorized the vulnerable for years. "Mr. Thornton is claiming he was ambushed," Judge Harrington said on the final day. "Says you set a trap for law-abiding citizens. They came armed to take a woman and child by force." Stone replied evenly. "We defended ourselves, with help from Indian," the marshal added, his tone disapproving. "With help from neighbors," Stone corrected. "The Arapaho have been better neighbors than most whites I've known." The judge studied him carefully. "You were military, Mr. Stone. Cavalry, 8th Regiment. Your service record speaks well of you, as does Deputy Morrison." Harrington closed his notebook. "Given the evidence, I find no cause for charges against you or Mrs. Mitchell. Thornton will stand trial for attempted kidnapping and assault." Relief flooded through Sarah. But the judge wasn't finished. "However," he continued, "this situation has raised concerns in Cedar Ridge. A woman and child living unmarried with a man, regardless of circumstances, sets a poor example." Sarah's cheeks burned. Before she could speak, Stone stood. "Then it's good we're planning to marry this week, if the judge would officiate." Harrington's eyebrows rose. "Is this true, Mrs. Mitchell?" "Yes," Sarah said firmly. "Very true." And so, 3 days later, they stood before Judge Harrington in the cabin's clearing. Morrison acted as witness, along with Mary Crow Feather and several townspeople who'd made the journey out of curiosity. Sarah wore her best dress, mended and clean. Stone had trimmed his beard and donned his old cavalry jacket, brass buttons polished to a shine. Thomas stood between them, holding the rings, simple bands Stone had carved from elk antler during the long winter nights. "Dearly beloved," Judge Harrington began, his formal words strange in the wilderness setting. But as Stone took her hands, as they spoke their vows with the mountains as witness, Sarah felt the rightness of it. This wasn't just legal formality. It was acknowledgement of bonds already forged. "I, Elijah Stone, take you, Sarah Mitchell, as my lawful wife, to protect and provide for, in plenty and in want, in sickness and in health, until death parts us. I, Sarah Mitchell, take you, Elijah Stone, as my lawful husband, to stand beside, in peace and in storm, in joy and in sorrow, until death parts us." When Judge Harrington pronounced them married, Thomas whooped with joy, and even the stern townspeople smiled. The celebration was simple: venison stew, wild berry pie, Mary's uncle playing a haunting melody on a bone flute, but it was theirs, and it was perfect. As evening fell and the guests prepared to leave, Judge Harrington pulled Stone aside. "Thornton's trial is next month. You'll need to testify." Stone's face hardened. "We'll be there." "Good. And Stone? The town's changing. The war between the states ended, and folks are looking for fresh starts. Might be you'd find Cedar Ridge more welcoming now than before." "We'll see," Stone said noncommittally. But after the procession left, he stood looking down the mountain trail thoughtfully. "You're considering it," Sarah said, joining him. "Morrison was right. Can't live like hermits forever. The boy needs schooling, other children. And you? What do you need?" He pulled her close. "Already got what I need, Matt. But maybe it's time to stop hiding from the world." The decision to spend part of each year in town wasn't made lightly. For Stone, it meant facing memories and civilization he'd fled. For Sarah, it meant confronting the judgment of proper society. For Thomas, it meant a chance at the education and friendships he'd missed. They started small. A week in Cedar Ridge for Thornton's trial, where their testimonies helped convict him of multiple crimes. The town that had once shunned Sarah now treated her with cautious respect. The woman who'd survived Thornton, who'd tamed the mountain hermit, who'd stood her ground against 20 armed men. Stone struggled more with the transition. Crowds made him tense. Walls felt like cages. But he endured it for his family, finding allies in unexpected places. The blacksmith, a former soldier himself, understood the weight of old ghosts. The general store owner, whose daughter had been one of Thornton's victims, offered credit and friendship. By summer, they'd established a pattern: 3 seasons on the mountain, winters in a small house on the edge of Cedar Ridge. Thomas thrived in school, quick and eager to learn. Sarah took in sewing to earn money, her neat stitches in demand. Stone found work as a hunting guide, his knowledge of the mountains invaluable to Eastern sportsmen seeking adventure. But the pull of their true home remained strong. Each spring, they returned to the cabin with relief, breathing easier in the thin mountain air. The clearing showed signs of their battle: scars on trees, disturbed earth where graves had been dug. But new growth covered the worst of it. "It's like the mountains forgiving us," Thomas said one day, helping Stone repair the chicken coop they'd built. "Mountains don't forgive or condemn." Stone replied, "They just are. It's people who need forgiving." The boy, wise beyond his years, nodded. "Have you forgiven yourself, Pa? For your brother?" Stone's hand stilled. It was a question Sarah had never dared ask, but children had their own directness. "Working on it," he said finally. "Every day I keep you and your ma safe. Feels like I earn a little more peace." I think he'd be glad. Thomas said simply, "That you found us, that you're not alone anymore." That evening, as they sat watching sunset paint the peaks gold, Stone told them he'd been thinking about the future. "This place needs a proper house. Cabin's too small for a growing family." Sarah's breath caught. They'd been careful, but nature had its own plans. How did you know? Same way I know when snow's coming. You're different. Glowing. She laughed, touching her still flat belly. Another mouth to feed, another soul to protect. Another blessing, Stone corrected. Boy needs siblings. Place needs more laughter. Thomas, overhearing, bounded over. A baby? Really? Really, Sarah confirmed. Come winter, you'll be a big brother. The boy's joy was infectious. He immediately began planning where the baby would sleep, what he'd teach it, how he'd protect it from everything bad in the world. Watching him, Sarah felt tears threaten. This boy who'd seen too much violence, too much loss, still had room in his heart for love and hope. They'd given him that, she and Stone together. They'd taken a frightened child and helped him become brave without losing his gentleness. What are you thinking? Stone asked quietly. That we did it. We survived. More than survived. We built something beautiful from all that pain. He took her hand, rough fingers gentle on hers. Not done building yet. As stars emerged in the darkening sky, they made plans. The new house would have real glass windows, a wooden floor, separate rooms for the children. They'd bring up a milk cow, expand the garden, maybe even build a small school for the scattered mountain families. It was ambitious, perhaps foolish. The mountains were still harsh, winters still deadly, the world below still capable of cruelty. But they'd learned that the greatest danger wasn't in daring too much. It was in accepting too little. Will you guard us forever? Sarah had asked in desperation months ago. Now she knew the answer went beyond Stone's promise. They guarded each other, all of them. This family forged in hardship and sealed in love. Thomas with his fierce young courage, the new life growing within her. Stone with his hard-won wisdom, and Sarah herself. No longer the frightened widow, but a mountain woman in her own right. Forever wasn't a word anymore. It was a daily choice, renewed with each sunrise, strengthened with each challenge met together. As they headed inside, Thomas playing his flute while Stone banked the fire and Sarah prepared their evening meal. The cabin filled with the ordinary magic of family life. Outside, the mountains stood eternal guard, neither friendly nor hostile but simply there, a testing ground where three broken people had discovered they were exactly what each other needed. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The territorial government might interfere. Old enemies might seek revenge. Nature would certainly test them again. But tonight, in their lamplit cabin with love warming the air more surely than any fire, they were complete. The widow had asked, and the mountain man had answered. Between question and promise, they'd built a life worth guarding. Forever. The spring sun cast long shadows across the valley as Sarah stood in the doorway of their new home, watching her family work the freshly turned earth. 5 years had passed since that desperate flight into the mountains, and the changes seemed like something from a dream. The cabin still stood, now serving as a workshop and storage, but beside it rose a proper house, 2 stories of hewn logs with real glass windows that caught the morning light. Stone had built it with help from the Arapaho and some men from Cedar Ridge, each beam placed with the same careful precision he brought to everything. Thomas, now 10 and tall for his age, guided the plow behind their draft horse, his movements confident and sure. Beside him walked little Emma, 3 years old with her mother's green eyes and her father's quiet intensity, dropping seeds into the furrows her brother created. "Mama, look!" Emma called out, holding up a handful of seeds. "I'm planting tomorrow." Sarah smiled, one hand resting on her swollen belly where another child grew. "That's right, sweet one. Every seed is tomorrow waiting to happen." Stone emerged from the tree line, rifle over his shoulder and a deer carcass across the pack mule. Even now, after years of peace, he moved with the watchful grace of a man who'd learned that safety was earned daily, never assumed. But the hard edges had softened. He smiled more, spoke easier with strangers, even joined the town meetings when they wintered in Cedar Ridge. "Good hunting?" Sarah asked as he approached. "Good enough. Saw a bear sign up by Crystal Creek. Need to keep the children close for a few weeks." Thomas straightened from his plowing. "I can track bear, Pa. You taught me." "Knowing and doing are different things," Stone replied. But there was pride in his voice. The boy had become everything he'd hoped. Strong, but not hard. Capable, but not cruel. That evening, as they gathered for supper in the dining room, Stone had built specifically for such moments. Deputy Morrison arrived with news from town. He'd married Mary Crowfeather 2 winters past, bridging 2 worlds in a union that had shocked some and inspired others. Judge Harrington's retiring, Morrison announced, accepting a plate of venison stew. They want to elect a new territorial judge. Several folks mentioned your name. Stone. Stone nearly choked on his coffee. Me? A judge? You've got the respect. Morrison pointed out. Fair-minded. Know the law from both sides. And after the Thornton trial, people remember how you stood for justice. I'm no politician. That's why you'd be good at it, Mary interjected, bouncing her own infant son on her knee. You see people for who they are, not who they claim to be. The conversation continued, but Sarah saw the thoughtfulness in Stone's eyes. Later, as they sat on the porch watching stars emerge, she broached the subject. You're considering it. Maybe. Never thought I'd be anything but a hermit or a ghost. He pulled her close, his hand gentle on her belly. Now I'm a husband, father, neighbor. Maybe it's time to be more. The mountains will always be here, but perhaps I can help make the law as fair as these peaks are honest. The decision wasn't made that night, or even that month, but slowly. Stone began spending more time in Cedar Ridge, studying law books, sitting in on trials. His natural sense of justice, honed by years of solitary contemplation and tested by violence, proved well suited to the work. When autumn came, painting the aspens gold, they hosted a harvest gathering. The clearing that had once seen desperate battle now welcomed neighbors from valleys throughout the region. Arapaho and white settlers mingled, sharing food and stories. Children ran between the tables, their laughter echoing off the peaks. Sarah watched it all from her chair, too heavy with child now for much movement. Emma dozed in her lap while Thomas helped serve the meal, proud in his responsibility. Stone moved through the crowd, no longer the isolated mountain man, but a pillar of the growing community. Never imagined this, said a voice beside her. Old Black Elk had approached silently, as was his way. When my nephew spoke of Ghostwalker, he described a man already half-spirit, seeking death in the mountains. What changed? Sarah asked. The old warrior smiled. You know the answer. Love changes everything. Makes the dead walk again, turns warriors into fathers, brings spring after the longest winter. As if summoned by his words, Sarah felt the first pain. By midnight, with the gathering transformed into an anxious vigil, she brought their 3rd child into the world, another son, loud and healthy and perfect. What shall we name him? Stone asked, cradling the infant with hands that had dealt death now infinitely gentle with new life. Samuel, Sarah decided. It means heard by God, because our prayers were heard, weren't they? When I asked if you'd guard us forever? They were, Stone agreed, and kissed her forehead. The years that followed brought their share of challenges. Stone did become a territorial judge, riding circuit through the mountains, bringing law tempered with understanding to the scattered settlements. His past as Ghostwalker, rather than haunting him, lent weight to his decisions. Here was a man who understood both violence and redemption. Thomas grew into a young man of remarkable character, equally at home in the wilderness and the classroom. He spoke of studying law himself, of building on what his adopted father had begun. Emma showed her mother's quick wit and her father's steady courage, while Samuel seemed born to the mountains, tracking and hunting before he could properly write his name. They still spent summers at the cabin, teaching their children the old skills, the hard-won wisdom of survival. But the isolation was gone. Trails that had once known only Stone's footsteps now carried regular visitors. The place of exile had become a landmark of hope. One evening, as Sarah and Stone sat watching sunset paint their valley gold, she asked, Any regrets? About what? The life you had before, the solitude. We changed everything. He was quiet for a long moment, then pulled her close. I had solitude. What you gave me was peace. There's a difference. And I asked if you'd guard us forever. Such a desperate question from a frightened woman. And I said yes. Best promise I ever made. He smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features. Though you guard me just as much. From the darkness, from the past. We guard each other. Thomas emerged from the house, now taller than his mother, carrying his little brother on his shoulders. Emma danced around them, singing a song Mary Crowfeather had taught her, a blend of Arapaho and English that spoke of new worlds being born. "Time for stories," Samuel demanded, and they gathered as they did each night, the family complete. Stone began as he always did. Once, in these very mountains, there lived a man who thought he was a ghost, but the story had changed over the years. No longer was it a tale of isolation and loss, but of redemption and discovery, of how a widow's desperate plea had awakened a dead man's heart, of how a frightened boy had found his courage, of how love had transformed a battlefield into a garden, a hideaway into a home, as stars emerged overhead and the fire crackled warmly. Sarah looked around at her family, this beautiful, impossible family built from broken pieces and second chances. The mountains stood eternal around them, no longer barriers but guardians, holding their valley like cupped hands, protecting something precious. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The territory was pushing toward statehood, bringing progress and problems in equal measure. There would be more trials for Judge Stone to oversee, more seasons to survive, more children to raise and protect. But tonight, in the gentle darkness with her family close and safe, Sarah knew the answer to her long-ago question had become more than a promise. It had become a legacy, passed from heart to heart, strong as the mountains themselves. Will you guard us forever? Yes, forever, and beyond. The fire burned low. The story ended, and one by one the children drifted off to sleep. Stone carried them to their beds while Sarah banked the coals, their movements synchronized by years of partnership. At the doorway, she paused, looking back at the room that had seen so much, desperate arrivals and joyous celebrations, fear and triumph, the whole messy beauty of a life fully lived. "Coming to bed?" Stone asked softly. "In a moment, just remembering." He understood, as he always did, came to stand beside her, solid and warm and eternally present. "No need to remember," he said. "We're still writing the story." And they were. Every sunrise, every shared meal, every challenge met together added another page to the tale of the widow and the mountain man, the boy who needed parents and the couple who needed purpose. In the morning, there would be chores and lessons, perhaps visitors from town or the Arapaho camp. Thomas would help his father with legal documents while Emma and Samuel played in the creek. Sarah would tend her garden and plan the winter's schooling, one hand often resting on Stone's shoulder as he worked, that simple touch saying everything words couldn't capture. But for now, they stood together in the doorway of the home they'd built, looking out at the stars above their valley, breathing the thin mountain air that had become more necessary than water. The same stars that had witnessed a desperate flight now blessed a family at peace. "Forever," Sarah whispered. Not a question anymore, but a statement of fact. "Forever," Stone agreed, and led his wife inside. The mountains kept their watch, ancient and enduring, cradling the valley where love had conquered fear, where broken people had become whole, where a simple question had opened the door to an extraordinary answer. And in the years that followed, when travelers asked about the Stone family and their remarkable story, the old-timers would smile and say, "Sit down, friend. Let me tell you about the day a desperate widow asked a mountain man for protection, and how that question changed everything." The story lived on, passed from voice to voice, growing richer with each telling. But at its heart remained the simple truth Sarah had discovered that long ago winter. Sometimes the greatest adventures begin not with grand gestures, but with the courage to ask for help, and the grace to offer it. In the wild heart of the Colorado Rockies, where once a man had come to die and a woman had fled to survive, a family thrived. They had been guarded, and they had learned to guard in return. Forever had been promised. Forever was kept. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. Where are you enjoying this tale from? We'd love to hear from listeners around the world. Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Sarah and Stone's journey in the comments below. Your stories and reflections make our community richer, just like the Stone family enriched their mountain valley.